The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, a comprehensive analysis. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, fought from May 8 to May 21, 1864, was one of the most significant engagements of the American Civil War. It was part of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's overland campaign, which aimed to destroy General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and bring the war to a swift conclusion. The battle was characterized by its ferocity, high casualties, and the extensive use of field fortifications. This article provides a detailed account of the battle, its strategic context, key events, and its impact on the course of the Civil War. Strategic context: the overland campaign. By the spring of 1864, the Civil War had entered its fourth year. President Abraham Lincoln had appointed Ulysses S. Grant as the General-in-Chief of all Union armies. Grant's strategy was to apply relentless pressure on the Confederacy by coordinating simultaneous offensives across multiple fronts. The primary objective of the overland campaign was to engage and destroy Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, thereby opening the way to the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. Grant's plan involved the Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General George G. Meade, moving southward to confront Lee's forces. The campaign began with the Battle of the Wilderness, May 5 to 7, 1864, a brutal and inconclusive engagement that set the stage for the subsequent clash at Spotsylvania Court House. The Confederate Defense General Robert E. Lee, aware of Grant's intentions, sought to delay the Union advance and protect Richmond. Lee's strategy was to use the terrain to his advantage, forcing the Union Army to attack well-entrenched positions. The Confederate Army was outnumbered and undersupplied, but Lee's tactical brilliance and the resilience of his troops made them a formidable opponent. The battlefield geography: Spotsylvania Court House is located in central Virginia, approximately 50 miles south of Washington, D.C. The terrain around Spotsylvania is characterized by dense forests, rolling hills, and numerous streams. These natural features played a crucial role in the battle, as they influenced troop movements and the construction of defensive works. Both armies made extensive use of field fortifications during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The Confederates, in particular, constructed a series of earthworks, trenches, and abatis, obstacles made of felled trees, to slow down and disrupt Union attacks. These fortifications were a testament to the evolving nature of warfare during the Civil War, where the combination of rifled muskets and entrenched positions made frontal assaults increasingly costly. The battle May 8 initial skirmishes: the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House began on May 8, 1864, as Union forces under Grant and Meade advanced southward from the Wilderness. Confederate cavalry, led by Major General J.E.B. Stuart, delayed the Union advance, allowing Lee's infantry to establish defensive positions around Spotsylvania Court House. The first significant engagement occurred at Laurel Hill, where Union forces attempted to dislodge Confederate troops from their entrenched positions. Despite several assaults, the Union Army was unable to break through, and the day ended with heavy casualties on both sides. May 9 to 10 The Mule Shoe salient. One of the most critical features of the Confederate defensive line was the Mule Shoe salient, a large, protruding bulge in the earthworks that allowed defenders to enfilade, fire along the length of, attacking forces. Recognizing the importance of this position, Grant ordered a series of assaults on the Mule Shoe. On May 10, Union forces under Major General Winfield Scott Hancock launched a determined attack on the western face of the Mule Shoe. Despite initial gains, the assault was repulsed with heavy losses. The fighting was intense, with hand-to-hand combat and the use of bayonets becoming common. May 12 The Bloody Angle. The most famous and brutal episode of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House occurred on May 12 at a section of the Mule Shoe known as the Bloody Angle. In the early morning hours, Union forces launched a surprise attack, overwhelming the Confederate defenders and breaching their lines. The fighting at the Bloody Angle was some of the most savage of the entire war. The combatants fought at close range, often in hand-to-hand combat, as rain turned the battlefield into a quagmire. The fighting continued for nearly 20 hours, with neither side willing to yield. By the end of the day, the Bloody Angle had lived up to its name, with thousands of casualties on both sides. May 13 to 21 Stalemate and withdrawal. Following the carnage at the Bloody Angle, both armies were exhausted and in need of rest. Grant, however, was determined to continue the offensive. Over the next several days, Union forces attempted to outflank the Confederate positions, but Lee's army skillfully countered these moves. On May 21, Grant decided to disengage and continue his march southward, aiming to draw Lee into another battle. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House ended in a tactical stalemate, but it was a strategic victory for the Union, as Grant's relentless pressure forced Lee to continually fall back toward Richmond. Key figures: Union commanders. Ulysses S. Grant. As the General-in-Chief of the Union armies, Grant was the architect of the Overland Campaign. His determination and willingness to accept heavy casualties were crucial in maintaining the offensive momentum. George G. Meade, commanding the Army of the Potomac, Meade worked closely with Grant to execute the campaign. Despite occasional disagreements, Meade's leadership was instrumental in the Union efforts at Spotsylvania. Winfield Scott Hancock, one of the Union's most capable corps commanders, Hancock led the two corps during the assaults on the Mule Shoe and the Bloody Angle. Confederate commanders. RobertELee, the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. Lee's tactical genius and ability to inspire his troops were key factors in the Confederate defense at Spotsylvania. J.E.B. Stuart, the Confederate cavalry commander. Stuart's efforts to delay the Union advance were crucial in allowing Lee's infantry to establish defensive positions. Richard S. Ewell, commanding the Confederate II Corps. Ewell's leadership during the defense of the Mule Shoe was vital in repelling Union assaults. Casualties and impact. Casualties. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War. Union casualties numbered approximately 18,000, while Confederate losses were around 12,000. The high casualty rates were a testament to the ferocity of the fighting and the effectiveness of entrenched defenses. Strategic impact. Although the battle ended in a tactical stalemate, it had significant strategic implications. Grant's willingness to continue the offensive despite heavy casualties demonstrated his commitment to a war of attrition. This approach put increasing pressure on the Confederacy, which could ill afford the losses sustained at Spotsylvania. The battle also marked a turning point in the war, as it signaled the beginning of the end for Lee's army. The relentless Union advances forced Lee to continually fall back, eventually leading to the Siege of Petersburg and the eventual fall of Richmond. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War. It showcased the evolving nature of warfare, with extensive use of field fortifications and the high cost of frontal assaults. The battle's ferocity and the determination of both sides highlighted the grim reality of the conflict. For the Union, the battle was a strategic victory, as it maintained the offensive momentum and put increasing pressure on the Confederacy. For the Confederates, it was a testament to their resilience and tactical skill, but it also foreshadowed the eventual collapse of their cause. The legacy of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House endures as a reminder of the sacrifices made by both sides during the Civil War. It stands as a testament to the courage and determination of the soldiers who fought there, and to the profound impact of their struggle on the course of American history. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. Key strategies employed by Grant and Lee. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, fought from May 8 to May 21, 1864, was a pivotal engagement in the American Civil War. It was part of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's Overland Campaign, which aimed to destroy General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and bring the war to a swift conclusion. The battle was characterized by its brutal and relentless nature, with both sides employing a variety of strategies to gain the upper hand. This article will delve into the key strategies employed by Grant and Lee during this critical battle, examining their tactical decisions, operational maneuvers, and the broader strategic context in which they operated. Background: The Overland Campaign. The Overland Campaign was a series of battles initiated by Grant in the spring of 1864. After being appointed General-in-Chief of all Union armies, Grant devised a comprehensive strategy to apply simultaneous pressure on Confederate forces across multiple fronts. The primary objective of the Overland Campaign was to engage Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in a war of attrition, leveraging the Union's superior resources and manpower to wear down the Confederate forces. Grant's strategy was a departure from previous Union campaigns, which had often been marked by caution and a reluctance to engage in prolonged combat. Grant recognized that the Confederacy could not sustain a prolonged war of attrition, and he sought to exploit this weakness by maintaining constant pressure on Lee's army. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a critical component of this strategy, following closely on the heels of the Battle of the Wilderness. The strategic importance of Spotsylvania Court House. Spotsylvania Court House, located in central Virginia, was a strategically significant location due to its proximity to key transportation routes, including the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. Control of this area would allow the Union Army to threaten the Confederate capital of Richmond and disrupt Confederate supply lines. For Lee, holding Spotsylvania was essential to maintaining his defensive position and preventing Grant from advancing further into Virginia. Grant's strategy: relentless offensive pressure. One of Grant's key strategies during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was to maintain relentless offensive pressure on Lee's army. Unlike previous Union commanders, who had often withdrawn after initial engagements, Grant was determined to keep the pressure on Lee, forcing the Confederate general to fight continuously and deplete his resources. Grant's approach was rooted in his understanding of the Union's strategic advantages. The North had a larger population, greater industrial capacity, and more extensive resources than the South. By engaging Lee in a series of battles, Grant aimed to exploit these advantages, gradually wearing down the Confederate army and making it increasingly difficult for Lee to replace his losses. Flanking maneuvers. Grant also employed flanking maneuvers as a key strategy during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. Recognizing that a direct assault on Lee's well-entrenched positions would be costly, Grant sought to outmaneuver the Confederate army and force Lee to abandon his defensive positions. One of the most notable flanking maneuvers occurred on May 8. When Grant ordered Major General Gouverneur K. Warren's V Corps to move around Lee's right flank. This maneuver forced Lee to extend his lines and commit additional troops to defend against the Union advance. Although the flanking maneuver did not result in a decisive breakthrough, it demonstrated Grant's willingness to use mobility and maneuver to gain a tactical advantage. Coordinated attacks. Grant's strategy also emphasized coordinated attacks across multiple fronts. By launching simultaneous assaults on different parts of Lee's line, Grant aimed to stretch the Confederate defenses and create opportunities for breakthroughs. This approach required careful coordination and communication among Union commanders, as well as the ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. One example of this strategy was the Union assault on the Mule Shoe salient on May 12. Grant ordered a concentrated attack on this vulnerable section of the Confederate line, resulting in some of the most intense and bloody fighting of the battle. Although the Union forces initially breached the Confederate defenses, they were unable to exploit the breakthrough due to fierce Confederate counterattacks and the arrival of reinforcements. Use of artillery. Grant also made effective use of artillery during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. Union artillery played a crucial role in supporting infantry assaults, suppressing Confederate defenses, and disrupting enemy movements. Grant's artillery commanders, including Brigadier General Henry J. Hunt, were skilled in positioning their guns to maximize their effectiveness and minimize their vulnerability to counter-battery fire. The Union artillery's ability to deliver concentrated and accurate fire was a significant factor in several key engagements during the battle. For example, during the assault on the Mule Shoe salient, Union artillery provided critical support to the attacking infantry, helping to suppress Confederate defenders and create opportunities for breakthroughs. Logistics and supply. Grant's strategy also emphasized the importance of logistics and supply. Recognizing that sustained offensive operations required a reliable supply line, Grant took steps to ensure that his army had access to the necessary resources. This included establishing supply depots, repairing railroads, and securing lines of communication. The Union's superior logistical capabilities were a significant advantage during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. While Lee's army often struggled with shortages of food, ammunition, and other supplies, Grant's forces were generally well supplied, allowing them to maintain their offensive operations over an extended period. Lee's strategy. Defensive entrenchments. One of Lee's key strategies during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was the use of defensive entrenchments. Recognizing that his army was outnumbered and outgunned, Lee sought to offset these disadvantages by constructing strong defensive positions. These entrenchments included earthworks, trenches, and abatis, obstacles made of felled trees, which provided cover for Confederate troops and made it difficult for Union forces to advance. Lee's defensive strategy was particularly effective in the early stages of the battle. The Confederate entrenchments at Spotsylvania were among the strongest of the war, and they allowed Lee's army to withstand repeated Union assaults. The Mule Shoe salient, in particular, was a formidable defensive position, with multiple lines of trenches and artillery emplacements. Elastic defense. Lee also employed an elastic defense strategy during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. This approach involved maintaining a flexible and adaptable defensive line, allowing Confederate forces to respond quickly to Union movements and counterattack when opportunities arose. The elastic defense was particularly effective in dealing with Grant's flanking maneuvers. When Grant attempted to outflank Lee's right on May 8, Lee quickly shifted his forces to meet the threat, extending his lines and reinforcing vulnerable sectors. This flexibility allowed Lee to maintain his defensive position and prevent Grant from achieving a decisive breakthrough. Counterattacks. Lee's strategy also emphasized the importance of counterattacks. Recognizing that a purely defensive approach would eventually lead to defeat, Lee sought to seize the initiative and disrupt Union operations by launching counterattacks at critical moments. One of the most notable counterattacks occurred during the Union assault on the Mule Shoe salient on May 12. After the Union forces breached the Confederate defenses, Lee ordered a series of counterattacks to regain control of the salient. These counterattacks, led by Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell and Major General John B. Gordon, were fiercely contested and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. However, they ultimately succeeded in repelling the Union forces and restoring the Confederate line. Use of terrain. Lee's strategy also made effective use of the terrain at Spotsylvania. The battlefield was characterized by dense forests, rolling hills, and numerous streams, which provided natural obstacles and cover for Confederate forces. Lee positioned his troops to take advantage of these features, using the terrain to slow down Union advances and create killing zones where his artillery and infantry could inflict maximum damage. For example, the dense woods around the Mule Shoe salient made it difficult for Union forces to maintain cohesion and coordinate their attacks. The rolling terrain also provided natural defensive positions for Confederate artillery, allowing them to deliver enfilading fire on advancing Union troops. Psychological warfare. Lee also employed psychological warfare as part of his strategy during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. Recognizing the importance of morale in sustaining his army's fighting spirit, Lee sought to inspire his troops and undermine the confidence of Union forces. One example of this strategy was Lee's famous "Lee to the rear" incident on May 12. During the intense fighting at the Mule Shoe salient, Lee attempted to lead a counterattack in person, but his troops, concerned for his safety, refused to advance until he moved to a safer position. This act of bravery and leadership boosted Confederate morale and demonstrated Lee's willingness to share the dangers of the battlefield with his men. Key engagements and tactical decisions. The Mule Shoe salient. The Mule Shoe salient was one of the most critical and contested areas during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. This protruding section of the Confederate line was vulnerable to attack from multiple directions, making it a prime target for Grant's forces. The Union assault on the Mule Shoe on May 12, known as the Bloody Angle, was one of the most intense and brutal engagements of the Civil War. Grant's decision to focus his attack on the Mule Shoe was based on the belief that a concentrated assault on this vulnerable sector could break the Confederate line and lead to a decisive victory. The Union forces initially succeeded in breaching the Confederate defenses, but fierce counterattacks and the arrival of reinforcements prevented a breakthrough. Lee's decision to hold the Mule Shoe, despite its vulnerability, was based on the strategic importance of maintaining a strong defensive position. The salient allowed Confederate forces to control key terrain and disrupt Union movements, making it a critical component of Lee's overall defensive strategy. The Battle of Harris Farm. The Battle of Harris Farm, fought on May 19, was another significant engagement during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. This battle occurred when Lee attempted to outflank Grant's army and disrupt Union supply lines. Lee's plan was to send Lieutenant General Richard H. Anderson's corps on a wide flanking maneuver to attack the Union rear. However, Grant's forces were prepared for such a move, and Union cavalry and infantry quickly responded to the threat. The resulting battle was a fierce and bloody engagement, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Although Lee's flanking maneuver did not achieve its intended objective, it demonstrated his willingness to take risks and seize the initiative in an attempt to disrupt Union operations. The final days of the battle. In the final days of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, both Grant and Lee continued to adapt their strategies in response to the evolving situation. Grant, determined to maintain the offensive, ordered a series of probing attacks and flanking maneuvers to keep pressure on Lee's army. Lee, in turn, continued to strengthen his defensive positions and launch counterattacks to disrupt Union operations. By May 21, Grant concluded that further attacks at Spotsylvania would be too costly and decided to shift his focus to a new objective. He ordered his army to move south towards the North Anna River, seeking to outmaneuver Lee and force the Confederate Army into a more vulnerable position. This decision marked the end of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House and the beginning of the next phase of the Overland Campaign. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a critical engagement in the American Civil War, showcasing the strategic and tactical acumen of both Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee. Grant's relentless offensive pressure, flanking maneuvers, coordinated attacks, and effective use of artillery and logistics demonstrated his determination to wear down Lee's army and bring the war to a swift conclusion. Lee's defensive entrenchments, elastic defense, counterattacks, use of terrain, and psychological warfare highlighted his ability to adapt and respond to Union movements. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the battle was marked by its intensity and brutality, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. However, it also demonstrated the resilience and determination of both armies, as well as the strategic importance of Spotsylvania Court House in the broader context of the Overland Campaign. Ultimately, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a testament to the complexities and challenges of Civil War warfare, and it set the stage for the continued struggle between Grant and Lee in the months to come. As the war progressed, the strategies employed by Grant and Lee at Spotsylvania would continue to shape the course of the conflict. Grant's willingness to engage in a war of attrition and his focus on maintaining constant pressure on Lee's army would ultimately prove decisive, leading to the eventual Union victory. Lee's defensive prowess and ability to adapt to changing circumstances would ensure that the Confederate Army remained a formidable opponent until the final days of the war. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House remains a powerful reminder of the sacrifices made by both Union and Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. It is a testament to the courage, determination, and resilience of those who fought on both sides, and it serves as a poignant example of the complexities and challenges of military strategy in one of the most pivotal conflicts in American history. How the terrain of Spotsylvania Court House influenced the outcome of the battle. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, fought from May 8 to May 21, 1864, was a pivotal engagement in Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's Overland Campaign during the American Civil War. The battle was marked by its ferocity, high casualties, and the extensive use of field fortifications. One of the most significant factors shaping the battle's outcome was the terrain of Spotsylvania Court House. The region's dense forests, rolling hills, and waterways created a challenging environment that influenced troop movements, defensive strategies, and the overall conduct of the battle. Geographical overview of Spotsylvania Court House. Spotsylvania Court House is located in central Virginia, approximately 50 miles south of Washington, D.C. The area is characterized by a mix of dense woodlands, open fields, and meandering streams. Key geographical features that played a role in the battle include dense forests. The region was heavily wooded, with thick underbrush that limited visibility and made large-scale maneuvers difficult. Rolling terrain. The landscape featured a series of low ridges and valleys, providing natural defensive positions. Waterways. The Ni River and other small streams crisscrossed the area, creating obstacles for advancing troops. Road networks. The intersection of several key roads, including the Brock Road and the Fredericksburg Road, made Spotsylvania Court House a strategic location for controlling movement in the region. The strategic importance of the terrain. The terrain of Spotsylvania Court House was strategically significant for both the Union and Confederate armies. For the Confederates, the dense forests and rolling hills offered excellent opportunities for constructing defensive fortifications. The natural obstacles provided by the terrain allowed General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia to establish strong defensive positions, which were further reinforced with earthworks, trenches, and abatis, obstacles made of felled trees. For the Union Army, the terrain posed significant challenges. The dense forests limited the effectiveness of their superior numbers and artillery, as visibility was often restricted to a few hundred yards. The rolling terrain also made it difficult to coordinate large-scale assaults, as troops had to navigate steep slopes and uneven ground. The Mule Shoe salient, a terrain-driven focal point. One of the most iconic features of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was the Mule Shoe salient, a large, protruding bulge in the Confederate defensive line. The salient was approximately 1 mile wide and half a mile deep, with its apex pointing northward. The terrain within and around the Mule Shoe played a critical role in the battle's outcome. Defensive advantages. The Mule Shoe's elevated position provided the Confederates with a commanding view of the surrounding area, allowing them to spot and repel Union advances. The dense forests on either side of the salient funneled Union troops into narrow approaches, making them vulnerable to concentrated fire vulnerabilities. While the Mule Shoe was a strong defensive position, its protruding shape made it susceptible to enfilading fire and attacks from multiple directions. The Union Army exploited this weakness during their May 12 assault, which resulted in some of the bloodiest fighting of the war. The role of earthworks and field fortifications. The terrain of Spotsylvania Court House encouraged the widespread use of field fortifications. Both sides constructed extensive networks of trenches, breastworks, and artillery emplacements to strengthen their positions. The dense forests provided ample materials for building these fortifications, while the rolling terrain allowed for the placement of artillery on high ground. Confederate defenses. The Confederates took full advantage of the terrain to create formidable defensive works. The Mule Shoe salient, in particular, was heavily fortified with trenches, abattis, and artillery positions. These defenses allowed the Confederates to repel multiple Union assaults with heavy casualties. Union adaptations. The Union Army, recognizing the strength of the Confederate defenses, also began constructing their own earthworks. These fortifications provided cover for Union troops and allowed them to maintain pressure on the Confederate lines. The impact of weather and ground conditions. The weather during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was wet and muddy, further complicating the already challenging terrain. The rain turned the ground into a quagmire, making it difficult for troops to move and for artillery to be repositioned. The muddy conditions also hindered the construction of fortifications and slowed the movement of supply wagons. Logistical challenges. The poor ground conditions made it difficult for both sides to maintain their supply lines. The Union Army, in particular, struggled to bring up reinforcements and ammunition in a timely manner. Troop fatigue. The combination of difficult terrain and adverse weather conditions took a toll on the soldiers. Exhaustion and exposure to the elements contributed to the high casualty rates on both sides. Tactical implications of the terrain. The terrain of Spotsylvania Court House had several tactical implications that influenced the battle's outcome. Limited maneuverability. The dense forests and rolling hills made it difficult for either side to execute large-scale flanking maneuvers. As a result, much of the fighting consisted of frontal assaults against heavily fortified positions. Artillery effectiveness. The terrain limited the effectiveness of artillery, as the dense forests and uneven ground made it difficult to establish clear lines of fire. Both sides relied heavily on close-range artillery support, often positioning their guns just behind the front lines. Close-quarters combat. The confined spaces created by the dense forests and narrow approaches led to intense close-quarters combat. The fighting at the Mule Shoe salient, in particular, was characterized by hand-to-hand combat and the use of bayonets. The human cost. Terrain and casualties. The challenging terrain of Spotsylvania Court House contributed to the battle's high casualty rates. The dense forests and rolling hills made it difficult for troops to advance or retreat safely, while the extensive use of field fortifications turned the battlefield into a killing ground. The Union Army suffered approximately 18,000 casualties, while the Confederates lost around 12,000 men. Union losses. The Union Army's repeated assaults against the Confederate defenses resulted in heavy losses. The terrain made it difficult to coordinate attacks, and many Union troops were cut down by concentrated rifle and artillery fire. Confederate losses. While the Confederates were able to hold their ground for much of the battle, they also suffered significant casualties. The intense fighting at the Mule Shoe salient and the constant pressure from Union attacks took a heavy toll on Lee's army. The terrain as a decisive factor. The terrain of Spotsylvania Court House was a decisive factor in the outcome of the battle. The dense forests, rolling hills, and waterways shaped the strategies and tactics employed by both sides, favoring the defenders and making it difficult for the attackers to achieve a decisive victory. While the Union Army was able to maintain pressure on the Confederates and inflict heavy casualties, the challenging terrain prevented them from achieving a breakthrough. In the end, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a costly stalemate that highlighted the importance of terrain in shaping the course of military engagements. The lessons learned from this battle would influence future campaigns, as both sides recognized the need to adapt their strategies to the realities of the battlefield. The long-term impacts of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House on the Civil War. The American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865, was a defining moment in the history of the United States. It was a conflict that pitted the northern states, the Union, against the southern states, the Confederacy, over issues of states' rights, slavery, and the future of the nation. Among the many battles that took place during this tumultuous period, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House stands out as one of the most significant. Fought from May 8 to May 21, 1864, in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, this battle was part of the larger overland campaign led by Union General Ulysses S. Grant against Confederate General Robert E. Lee. The battle was marked by its ferocity, high casualties, and the extensive use of trench warfare, which foreshadowed the brutal combat of World War I. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was not just another engagement in the long list of Civil War battles. It had profound and lasting impacts on the course of the war, the strategies employed by both sides, and the eventual outcome of the conflict. This article will explore the long-term impacts of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House on the Civil War, examining its influence on military tactics, the morale of both armies, the home front, and the eventual path to Union victory. The strategic context of the battle. To understand the long-term impacts of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, it is essential to place it within the broader strategic context of the Civil War. By the spring of 1864, the war had been raging for nearly 3 years, and both sides were weary but determined. The Union, under the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant, was committed to a strategy of total war, aimed at destroying the Confederacy's ability to fight. This strategy involved not only defeating Confederate armies in the field but also targeting the South's infrastructure, economy, and civilian population. The Overland Campaign, of which the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a part, was Grant's first major offensive in the Eastern Theater after being appointed General-in-Chief of the Union Army. The campaign's objective was to engage and destroy Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, thereby opening the way to Richmond, the Confederate capital. Grant's strategy was one of relentless pressure, with the Union forces continuously moving forward, regardless of casualties, to prevent Lee from regrouping or reinforcing his army. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House followed closely on the heels of the Battle of the Wilderness, another brutal engagement that resulted in heavy casualties for both sides. Unlike previous Union commanders in the East, Grant did not retreat after the Wilderness, but instead pushed forward, seeking to outflank Lee and force him into a decisive battle. This determination to press the attack, even in the face of heavy losses, was a hallmark of Grant's strategy and would have significant implications for the rest of the war. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. A brief overview. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was fought over a 2-week period, from May 8 to May 21, 1864. It was characterized by intense fighting, particularly around the Confederate defensive works known as the Mule Shoe salient. The battle saw some of the most ferocious close-quarters combat of the war, including the infamous Bloody Angle, where Union and Confederate soldiers fought hand-to-hand for hours in a desperate struggle for control of the trenches. The battle began when Grant's Army of the Potomac, under the command of General George G. Meade, moved south after the inconclusive Battle of the Wilderness, attempting to outflank Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Lee, however, anticipated Grant's movements and quickly shifted his forces to block the Union advance at Spotsylvania Court House. The two armies clashed in a series of engagements, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. One of the most significant moments of the battle occurred on May 12, when Union forces launched a massive assault on the Mule Shoe salient. The fighting at the Bloody Angle was some of the most intense of the entire war, with soldiers on both sides enduring horrific conditions, including rain, mud, and the constant threat of death. Despite the ferocity of the Union attack, the Confederate defenses held, and the battle ended in a tactical stalemate. However, the strategic implications of the battle were far-reaching. Grant's decision to continue pressing the attack, rather than retreating as previous Union commanders had done, signaled a new phase in the war. The Union's willingness to accept heavy casualties in pursuit of its objectives demonstrated a level of determination and resolve that would ultimately prove decisive in the conflict. The impact on military tactics and strategy. One of the most significant long-term impacts of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was its influence on military tactics and strategy. The battle highlighted the effectiveness of defensive fortifications and trench warfare, which would become increasingly important in the later stages of the Civil War and in future conflicts. The rise of trench warfare. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was one of the first major engagements of the Civil War to feature extensive use of trench warfare. Both Union and Confederate forces constructed elaborate earthworks, including trenches, breastworks, and artillery emplacements, to protect their positions and repel enemy attacks. The Confederate defenses at the Mule Shoe salient, in particular, were a testament to the effectiveness of well-constructed fortifications. The use of trenches and fortifications at Spotsylvania foreshadowed the type of warfare that would dominate World War I, where armies would dig in and fight from entrenched positions for years on end. The lessons learned at Spotsylvania about the importance of defensive works and the difficulty of dislodging a well-entrenched enemy would have a lasting impact on military thinking. The evolution of offensive tactics. While the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House demonstrated the effectiveness of defensive fortifications, it also highlighted the challenges of conducting successful offensive operations against entrenched positions. Union forces repeatedly assaulted the Confederate lines, often with little to show for their efforts other than heavy casualties. The failure of these attacks underscored the need for new offensive tactics that could overcome the advantages of defensive fortifications. In the aftermath of Spotsylvania, both Union and Confederate commanders began to experiment with new tactics and strategies. For the Union, this included a greater emphasis on coordinated attacks, the use of artillery to soften enemy defenses, and the development of new technologies, such as repeating rifles and more effective artillery. The Confederacy, meanwhile, continued to rely on its defensive strengths but also sought ways to counter the Union's numerical and material advantages. The concept of total war. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House also reinforced the concept of total war, which had become a central tenet of Union strategy under Grant. Total war involved not only targeting enemy armies, but also attacking the enemy's infrastructure, economy, and civilian population to undermine their ability to wage war. At Spotsylvania, Grant's willingness to accept heavy casualties in pursuit of his objectives demonstrated a commitment to this strategy that would continue throughout the rest of the war. The concept of total war would have profound implications for the conduct of the Civil War and for future conflicts. It marked a shift away from the more limited, Napoleonic-style warfare that had characterized earlier stages of the war and towards a more modern, industrialized form of warfare that sought to achieve victory through the complete destruction of the enemy's capacity to resist. The impact on morale and public opinion. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House had significant impacts on the morale of both the Union and Confederate armies, as well as on public opinion in the North and South. The high casualties and brutal nature of the fighting at Spotsylvania took a toll on the soldiers on both sides, while the battle's outcome influenced the perceptions of the war among civilians. Union morale and the will to fight for the Union. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a test of the Army's resolve and its willingness to endure heavy casualties in pursuit of victory. The Union suffered approximately 18,000 casualties during the battle, a staggering number that underscored the high cost of Grant's strategy of relentless pressure. Despite these losses, the Union Army remained committed to the fight, a testament to the leadership of Grant and the determination of the Union soldiers. The battle also had an impact on Union morale at home. While the heavy casualties were a source of concern, the fact that Grant continued to press the attack and refused to retreat was seen as a sign of strength and determination. This bolstered public support for the war effort and reinforced the belief that the Union was on the path to victory. Confederate morale and the strain of war. For the Confederacy, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was both a tactical success and a strategic challenge. While Lee's army had managed to hold off Grant's attacks and inflict heavy casualties, the battle also highlighted the growing strain on Confederate resources and manpower. The Confederacy was increasingly outnumbered and outgunned, and the relentless pressure from Grant's army was taking a toll on Lee's forces. The battle also had an impact on Confederate morale, both on the battlefield and at home. While the Confederate soldiers had fought valiantly and held their ground, the sheer scale of The Union's attacks and the knowledge that Grant would not relent were demoralizing. The high casualties suffered by the Confederacy at Spotsylvania further exacerbated the strain on the South's already limited manpower, making it increasingly difficult to replace losses and maintain the Army's effectiveness. Public opinion and the home front. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House also had significant implications for public opinion in both the North and the South. In the North, the battle reinforced the perception that the Union was making progress towards victory, despite the high cost in lives. The fact that Grant continued to press the attack and refused to retreat was seen as a sign of the Union's determination to see the war through to its conclusion. In the South, however, the battle was a reminder of the growing challenges facing the Confederacy. The high casualties and the relentless pressure from Grant's army were a source of concern for Southern civilians, who were already struggling with the effects of the war on their economy and daily lives. The battle also highlighted the growing disparity in resources between the North and the South, as the Union's industrial and numerical advantages became increasingly apparent. The impact on the path to Union victory. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House played a crucial role in shaping the path to Union victory in the Civil War. While the battle itself was a tactical stalemate, its strategic implications were far-reaching, contributing to the eventual defeat of the Confederacy. The Overland Campaign and the Siege of Petersburg. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a key part of the Overland Campaign, which marked a turning point in the war. Grant's strategy of relentless pressure and his willingness to accept heavy casualties in pursuit of his objectives set the stage for the eventual Union victory. After Spotsylvania, Grant continued to push south, engaging Lee's army in a series of battles that culminated in the Siege of Petersburg. The Siege of Petersburg, which lasted from June 1864 to April 1865, was a direct result of the Overland Campaign and the battles that preceded it, including Spotsylvania. The siege was a protracted struggle that saw both sides dug into extensive trench systems, reminiscent of the fighting at Spotsylvania. The Union's ability to maintain the siege and gradually wear down the Confederate defenses was a testament to the effectiveness of Grant's strategy and the lessons learned at Spotsylvania. The erosion of Confederate resources. One of the most significant long-term impacts of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was its contribution to the erosion of Confederate resources. The high casualties suffered by Lee's army at Spotsylvania, combined with the relentless pressure from Grant's forces, placed an increasing strain on the Confederacy's already limited manpower and supplies. The Confederacy was unable to replace its losses at the same rate as the Union, and the cumulative effect of these losses began to take a toll on the Army's effectiveness. The battle also highlighted the growing disparity in resources between the North and the South. The Union's industrial and numerical advantages allowed it to sustain heavy casualties and continue the fight, while the Confederacy struggled to keep up. This disparity became increasingly apparent as the war progressed, and it played a crucial role in the eventual Union victory. The psychological impact on Confederate leadership. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House also had a psychological impact on Confederate leadership, particularly on General Robert E. Lee. While Lee had managed to hold off Grant's attacks at Spotsylvania, the battle was a stark reminder of the challenges facing the Confederacy. The relentless pressure from Grant's army and the high casualties suffered by Lee's forces were a source of concern for the Confederate commander, who recognized the growing difficulty of sustaining the war effort. Lee's ability to continue fighting in the face of these challenges was a testament to his skill as a commander, but it also highlighted the growing desperation of the Confederate cause. The psychological impact of the battle on Lee and other Confederate leaders contributed to the eventual collapse of the Confederacy. As the strain of the war became increasingly difficult to bear. The legacy of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House left a lasting legacy on the Civil War and on the history of warfare more broadly. The battle's impact on military tactics, the morale of both armies, and the path to Union victory were profound, and its lessons would continue to resonate in future conflicts. The influence on future military conflicts. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was one of the first major engagements to feature extensive use of trench warfare, and its lessons would have a lasting impact on military thinking. The effectiveness of defensive fortifications and the challenges of conducting successful offensive operations against entrenched positions were lessons that would be relearned in World War I. Where trench warfare would dominate the battlefield. The battle also highlighted the importance of logistics, resources, and industrial capacity in modern warfare. The Union's ability to sustain heavy casualties and continue the fight was a testament to its industrial and numerical advantages, while the Confederacy's struggles to replace its losses underscored the importance of these factors in determining the outcome of a conflict. The memory of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House is remembered as one of the most brutal and hard-fought engagements of the Civil War. The high casualties and the ferocity of the fighting, particularly at the Bloody Angle, have left a lasting impression on the memory of the war. The battle is often cited as an example of the horrors of war and the sacrifices made by soldiers on both sides. The memory of the battle has also been shaped by the accounts of those who fought there. Soldiers on both sides wrote about their experiences at Spotsylvania, describing the intense fighting, the terrible conditions, and the bravery of their comrades. These accounts have helped to preserve the memory of the battle and to ensure that the sacrifices made by those who fought there are not forgotten. The impact on the Civil War's outcome. Ultimately, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of the Civil War. The battle's impact on military tactics, the morale of both armies, and the erosion of Confederate resources all contributed to the eventual Union victory. The lessons learned at Spotsylvania would continue to influence the conduct of the war and would help to pave the way for the Union's final triumph. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War, with profound and lasting impacts on the course of the conflict. The battle's influence on military tactics, the morale of both armies, and the path to Union victory were significant, and its legacy continues to be felt to this day. The lessons learned at Spotsylvania about the effectiveness of defensive fortifications, the challenges of offensive operations, and the importance of resources and industrial capacity in modern warfare would continue to resonate in future conflicts, shaping the way wars are fought and remembered. As we reflect on the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House and its long-term impacts, we are reminded of the sacrifices made by those who fought there and the enduring legacy of their struggle. The battle stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of the soldiers on both sides, and to the profound impact that a single engagement can have on the course of history. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, a comparative analysis of casualties in the context of the American Civil War. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, remains one of the most pivotal and devastating conflicts in United States history. It was a war that pitted brother against brother, state against state, and ideology against ideology. Among the many battles that defined this brutal conflict, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House stands out as one of the bloodiest and most significant engagements. Fought between May 8 and May 21, 1864, as part of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's Overland Campaign, the battle was a grueling testament to the ferocity and determination of both the Union and Confederate forces. This article seeks to explore the casualties sustained during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House and compare them to those of other major battles in the Civil War. By examining the human cost of this battle in the broader context of the war, we can gain a deeper understanding of its significance and the toll it took on both sides. The analysis will delve into the strategic importance of the battle, the tactics employed, the conditions on the battlefield, and the broader implications of the casualties for the war effort. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, an overview. Background and strategic context. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was part of the Overland Campaign, a series of battles initiated by Union General Ulysses S. Grant in the spring of 1864. Grant's objective was to engage and destroy the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, commanded by General Robert E. Lee, and to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. Unlike previous Union commanders, Grant was determined to fight a war of attrition, leveraging the North's superior resources and manpower to wear down the Confederacy. Following the inconclusive Battle of the Wilderness, May 5 to 7, 1864, Grant ordered his army to move southeast toward Spotsylvania Court House, a key crossroads that would allow him to position his forces between Lee's army and Richmond. Lee, anticipating Grant's move, rushed his troops to Spotsylvania, resulting in a fierce and prolonged engagement. The battle unfolds. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was characterized by intense fighting, particularly around the Confederate defensive works known as the Mule Shoe salient. On May 12, 1864, Union forces launched a massive assault on the salient, resulting in some of the most brutal hand-to-hand combat of the war. The fighting was so intense that it became known as the Bloody Angle, where soldiers fought in close quarters amidst heavy rain and mud, often using bayonets and clubbed muskets. The battle lasted for nearly 2 weeks, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite repeated Union assaults, the Confederate lines held, and Grant eventually decided to disengage and continue his advance toward Richmond. The battle ended in a tactical stalemate, but it was a strategic victory for the Union, as Grant's relentless pressure continued to wear down Lee's army. Casualties at Spotsylvania. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War. Union forces suffered approximately 18,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing, while Confederate losses were estimated at around 12,000. These figures highlight the ferocity of the fighting and the high human cost of Grant's strategy of attrition. Comparing casualties, Spotsylvania in context. To fully appreciate the significance of the casualties at Spotsylvania, it is essential to compare them to those of other major battles in the Civil War. The following sections will examine several key battles, analyzing their casualty figures and placing Spotsylvania within the broader narrative of the war. The Battle of Gettysburg, July 1 to 3, 1863. Often considered the turning point of the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg was the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. Union forces, commanded by General George G. Meade, clashed with Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in a 3-day engagement that resulted in a decisive Union victory. Union casualties, approximately 23,000, killed, wounded, and missing. Confederate casualties, approximately 28,000, killed, wounded, and missing. Gettysburg's total casualties, around 51,000, far exceeded those of Spotsylvania, around 30,000. However, Gettysburg was a shorter battle, lasting only 3 days compared to Spotsylvania's nearly 2 weeks. The intensity of the fighting at Spotsylvania, particularly at the Bloody Angle, was comparable to the most brutal moments of Gettysburg. The Battle of Antietam, September 17, 1862. The Battle of Antietam, also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg, was the bloodiest single-day battle in American history. Fought in Maryland, it marked the first major Confederate incursion into the North and ended in a tactical draw, though it was strategically significant as it led to President Abraham Lincoln's issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. Union casualties, approximately 12,400. Confederate casualties, approximately 10,300. While Antietam's total casualties, around 22,700, were lower than those of Spotsylvania, the fact that they occurred in a single day underscores the battle's ferocity. Spotsylvania's casualties, spread over nearly 2 weeks, reflect the prolonged and grueling nature of the fighting. The Battle of Chancellorsville, April 30 to May 6, 1863. The Battle of Chancellorsville is often regarded as General Robert E. Lee's greatest victory. Despite being outnumbered, Lee's audacious tactics, including the division of his army and a flanking maneuver led by General Thomas Stonewall Jackson, resulted in a significant Confederate victory. Union casualties, approximately 17,000. Confederate casualties, approximately 13,000. Chancellorsville's total casualties, around 30,000, are similar to those of Spotsylvania. However, Chancellorsville was a shorter battle, lasting about a week, and the Confederate victory came at a high cost, including the loss of Stonewall Jackson, who was mortally wounded by friendly fire. The Battle of Chickamauga, September 19 to 20, 1863. The Battle of Chickamauga, fought in Georgia, was one of the few major Confederate victories in the Western theater. It was also one of the bloodiest battles of the war, with heavy casualties on both sides. Union casualties, approximately 16,000. Confederate casualties, approximately 18,000. Chickamauga's total casualties, around 34,000, are slightly higher than those of Spotsylvania. The battle was notable for its high number of killed and wounded, reflecting the intense combat that characterized the fighting in the Western theater. The Battle of the Wilderness, May 5 to 7, 1864. The Battle of the Wilderness, fought immediately before Spotsylvania, was the first major engagement of Grant's overland campaign. It was a chaotic and brutal battle, fought in dense woods that made coordination and visibility difficult. Union casualties, approximately 17,500. Confederate casualties, approximately 11,000. The Wilderness's total casualties, around 28,500, are comparable to those of Spotsylvania. The two battles, fought in quick succession, marked the beginning of a relentless and bloody campaign that would continue to grind down both armies. The Battle of Cold Harbor, May 31 to June 12, 1864, the Battle of Cold Harbor, fought shortly after Spotsylvania, was another brutal engagement in Grant's overland campaign. It is particularly infamous for the Union assault on June 3, 1864, which resulted in heavy casualties in a matter of minutes. Union casualties, approximately 12,000 Confederate casualties, approximately 4,000 Cold Harbor's total casualties, around 16,000, are lower than those of Spotsylvania, but the battle is remembered for the disproportionate losses suffered by the Union during the ill-fated assault on June 3. The high casualties at Cold Harbor further underscored the cost of Grant's strategy of attrition. The Siege of Petersburg, June 9, 1864 to March 25, 1865. The Siege of Petersburg was a prolonged campaign of trench warfare that lasted for nearly 10 months. It was a critical part of Grant's strategy to cut off Confederate supply lines and force Lee's surrender. Union casualties, approximately 42,000 Confederate casualties, approximately 28,000. The Siege of Petersburg's total casualties, around 70,000, far exceed those of Spotsylvania. However, the siege was a protracted campaign rather than a single battle, and the casualties were spread over a much longer period. The siege's high casualty count reflects the grueling nature of trench warfare and the relentless pressure applied by Grant's forces. The Battle of Shiloh, April 6 to 7, 1862. The Battle of Shiloh, fought in Tennessee, was one of the early major battles of the Civil War. It was a costly Union victory that demonstrated the war's potential for large-scale casualties. Union casualties, approximately 13,000 Confederate casualties, approximately 10,700 Shiloh's total casualties, around 23,700, are lower than those of Spotsylvania, but the battle was significant for its high number of killed and wounded relative to the size of the armies involved. Shiloh marked a turning point in the war, as it became clear that the conflict would be long and bloody. The Battle of Fredericksburg, December 11 to 15, 1862. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a disastrous Union defeat, with Union forces suffering heavy casualties in repeated assaults on well-entrenched Confederate positions. Union casualties, approximately 12,500 Confederate casualties, approximately 5,000 Fredericksburg's total casualties, around 17,500, are lower than those of Spotsylvania, but the battle is remembered for the lopsided nature of the losses, with Union forces bearing the brunt of the casualties. The battle highlighted the challenges of frontal assaults against fortified positions, a lesson that would be repeated at Spotsylvania. The Battle of Stones River, December 31, 1862 to January 2, 1863, the Battle of Stones River, fought in Tennessee, was one of the bloodiest battles of the war relative to the number of troops engaged. It ended in a Union victory, but at a high cost. Union casualties, approximately 13,000 Confederate casualties, approximately 10,000 Stones River's total casualties, around 23,000, are lower than those of Spotsylvania, but the battle was significant for its high percentage of casualties relative to the size of the armies. The battle's outcome had important implications for the Union's control of Tennessee. Analysis and implications. The comparison of casualties at the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House to those of other major Civil War battles reveals several key insights. Scale of casualties. Spotsylvania's total casualties, around 30,000, place it among the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. While it does not surpass the total casualties of Gettysburg or the Siege of Petersburg, it exceeds those of many other significant battles, such as Antietam, Chancellorsville, and Shiloh. Duration and intensity. Spotsylvania's nearly 2-week duration and the intensity of the fighting, particularly at the bloody angle, distinguish it from shorter battles like Antietam and Fredericksburg. The prolonged nature of the battle and the relentless pressure applied by Grant's forces contributed to the high casualty count. Strategic significance. While Spotsylvania ended in a tactical stalemate, it was a strategic victory for the Union. Grant's willingness to sustain heavy casualties in pursuit of his objective of wearing down Lee's army marked a turning point in the war. The battle demonstrated the North's resolve and its ability to absorb losses that the South could not afford. Human cost. The high casualties at Spotsylvania, like those at other major battles, underscore the human cost of the Civil War. The battle's toll on both Union and Confederate forces was a stark reminder of the war's brutality and the sacrifices made by soldiers on both sides. Comparative context. When placed in the broader context of the Civil War, Spotsylvania's casualties highlight the escalating intensity of the conflict as it entered its final stages. The battles of 1864, including Spotsylvania, the Wilderness, and Cold Harbor, were characterized by high casualties and a relentless pace of operations, reflecting Grant's strategy of attrition. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a pivotal engagement in the American Civil War, marked by intense fighting and heavy casualties. When compared to other major battles, Spotsylvania stands out for its prolonged duration, the ferocity of the combat, and the high human cost. While it may not have the same level of name recognition as Gettysburg or Antietam, its significance in the broader context of the war cannot be overstated. The casualties sustained at Spotsylvania, like those at other battles, serve as a somber reminder of the sacrifices made by soldiers on both sides of the conflict. They also highlight the brutal reality of a war that pitted Americans against each other in a struggle for the nation's future. As we reflect on the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House and its place in Civil War history, we are reminded of the enduring impact of this conflict and the importance of remembering those who fought and died in it. The role of the Mule Shoe salient in the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The American Civil War, a pivotal conflict in United States history, was marked by numerous battles that shaped the course of the nation. Among these, the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House stands out as one of the most grueling and significant engagements. Fought from May 8 to May 21, 1864, this battle was part of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's overland campaign, which aimed to destroy General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and bring the war to a swift conclusion. Within the broader context of this battle, the Mule Shoe salient emerged as a critical focal point, playing a decisive role in the outcome of the engagement. This article delves into the intricacies of the Mule Shoe salient, examining its strategic importance, the brutal fighting that took place there, and its lasting impact on the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The strategic context of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The Overland Campaign. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a continuation of the Overland Campaign, a series of battles initiated by Union General Ulysses S. Grant in the spring of 1864. Grant's strategy was to apply relentless pressure on the Confederate forces, leveraging the Union's superior numbers and resources to wear down the Confederacy. The campaign began with the Battle of the Wilderness, May 5 to 7, 1864, where both sides suffered heavy casualties but neither achieved a decisive victory. Following this engagement, Grant ordered his army to move southward, aiming to interpose itself between Lee's army and the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The importance of Spotsylvania Court House. Spotsylvania Court House, a small village in central Virginia, became the next battleground due to its strategic location. Control of this area would allow the Union forces to threaten Richmond and disrupt Confederate supply lines. Recognizing the importance of this position, Lee's Army of Northern Virginia moved to block Grant's advance, setting the stage for a prolonged and bloody confrontation. The Mule Shoe salient, a tactical anomaly within the Confederate defensive lines at Spotsylvania. The Mule Shoe salient was a prominent feature. A salient is a battlefield feature that projects outward into enemy territory, creating a bulge in the defensive line. While salients can offer certain tactical advantages, such as providing a vantage point for enfilading fire, they are also vulnerable to attack from multiple sides. The Mule Shoe salient, named for its resemblance to the shape of a mule's shoe, was a particularly large and pronounced bulge in the Confederate lines, extending nearly a mile into Union territory. The construction and defense of the Mule Shoe salient. Confederate defensive preparations. The Confederate forces, under the command of General Robert E. Lee, were well aware of the strategic importance of the Mule Shoe salient. To fortify this position, they constructed extensive earthworks, including trenches, abatis, obstacles made of felled trees, and artillery emplacements. These defenses were designed to repel Union assaults and inflict heavy casualties on any attacking force. The role of artillery played a crucial role in the defense of the Mule Shoe salient. Confederate batteries were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, creating a deadly crossfire that could decimate advancing Union troops. The dense woods surrounding the salient also provided natural cover for Confederate gunners, making it difficult for Union artillery to neutralize these positions. The Confederate infantry defending the Mule Shoe salient were some of the most experienced and battle-hardened troops in Lee's army. Units such as the Stonewall Brigade, commanded by General Richard Ewell, were known for their tenacity and fighting spirit. These soldiers were well prepared to defend their positions, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Union assault on the Mule Shoe salient. Grant's decision to attack. Despite the formidable defenses of the Mule Shoe salient, General Grant believed that a concentrated assault could break through the Confederate lines. On the night of May 11, 1864, Grant ordered Major General Winfield Scott Hancock's II Corps to prepare for a dawn attack on the salient. The plan called for a surprise assault, with the hope of catching the Confederates off guard and overwhelming their defenses. The initial assault at dawn on May 12, 1864, Hancock's II Corps launched its attack on the Mule Shoe salient. The Union troops advanced through dense fog, which initially provided cover but also caused confusion and disorganization. Despite these challenges, the Union forces managed to breach the Confederate defenses at several points, capturing a significant number of prisoners and artillery pieces. The Bloody Angle. The most intense fighting occurred at a section of the Mule Shoe salient known as the Bloody Angle. Here, Union and Confederate forces engaged in hand-to-hand combat, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The fighting was so fierce that the ground became saturated with blood, and the bodies of the fallen were piled high. The Bloody Angle became a symbol of the brutal and relentless nature of the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. Confederate counterattacks. Despite the initial success of the Union assault, the Confederate forces quickly rallied and launched a series of counterattacks. These counterattacks, led by General John B. Gordon, were aimed at retaking the lost ground and pushing the Union forces back. The fighting at the Bloody Angle continued for nearly 20 hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The aftermath of the Mule Shoe salient. Casualties and losses. The fighting at the Mule Shoe salient resulted in staggering casualties for both sides. The Union forces suffered approximately 9,000 casualties, while the Confederates lost around 8,000 men. The high number of casualties underscored the ferocity of the fighting and the determination of both sides to prevail. The impact on the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The Union assault on the Mule Shoe salient, while not resulting in a decisive breakthrough, had a significant impact on the overall Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The heavy losses sustained by both sides forced a temporary lull in the fighting, allowing both armies to regroup and reassess their strategies. The battle ultimately ended in a tactical stalemate, with neither side achieving a clear victory. The strategic implications. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, and the fighting at the Mule Shoe salient in particular, highlighted the challenges of Grant's overland campaign. Despite the Union's numerical superiority, the Confederate forces demonstrated their ability to hold their ground and inflict heavy casualties. This pattern of attritional warfare would continue throughout the campaign, ultimately leading to the eventual Union victory, but at a tremendous cost in human lives. The legacy of the Mule Shoe salient. The Mule Shoe salient. In military history, the Mule Shoe salient has become a symbol of the brutal and relentless nature of Civil War combat. The fighting at the Bloody Angle, in particular, is often cited as one of the most intense and gruesome engagements of the war. The lessons learned from the Mule Shoe salient have been studied by military historians and strategists, offering insights into the challenges of assaulting fortified positions and the importance of effective defensive preparations. The human cost of war. The high casualties sustained at the Mule Shoe salient serve as a stark reminder of the human cost of war. The bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought there, on both sides, are commemorated in numerous memorials and historical accounts. The Mule Shoe salient stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of those who endured the horrors of battle. The Mule Shoe salient. In popular memory. The Mule Shoe salient has also captured the imagination of writers, artists, and filmmakers, who have sought to capture the drama and tragedy of the fighting there. From historical novels to documentaries, the story of the Mule Shoe salient continues to resonate with audiences, offering a window into the past and a reminder of the sacrifices made during the Civil War. Conclusion. The Mule Shoe salient played a pivotal role in the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, shaping the course of the engagement and leaving a lasting impact on the Civil War. The intense fighting at the Bloody Angle, the high casualties sustained by both sides, and the strategic implications of the battle all underscore the significance of this battlefield feature. As we reflect on the legacy of the Mule Shoe salient, we are reminded of the bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought there, and the enduring lessons of this pivotal moment in American history. Defensive mastery. RobertElee's tactics at the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House, fought from May 8 to May 21, 1864, was one of the most grueling and significant engagements of the American Civil War. It was part of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's Overland Campaign, a relentless push to destroy General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. At Spotsylvania, Lee demonstrated his exceptional skill in defensive warfare, employing a combination of terrain utilization, fortifications, and tactical flexibility to counter Grant's superior numbers and relentless aggression. This article examines the key defensive tactics Lee employed during the battle, which allowed his outnumbered forces to hold their ground against overwhelming odds. Strategic use of terrain. One of Lee's greatest strengths as a commander was his ability to read and exploit the terrain to his advantage. At Spotsylvania, he chose a defensive position that maximized the natural features of the landscape to hinder Union advances and protect his flanks. The Mule Shoe salient. The most famous feature of the Spotsylvania battlefield was the Mule Shoe salient, a large, protruding bulge in the Confederate line. While salients are often vulnerable to enfilading fire and attacks from multiple directions, Lee recognized that the dense woods and uneven terrain surrounding the Mule Shoe made it difficult for Union forces to coordinate large-scale assaults. The salient also allowed Confederate artillery to dominate the approaches, forcing Union troops to advance through deadly crossfire. High ground and forests. Lee positioned his troops on high ground wherever possible, giving his men a clear field of fire and forcing Union attackers to charge uphill. The dense forests surrounding Spotsylvania Court House further complicated Union movements, breaking up formations and slowing advances. Lee's use of the terrain forced Grant to fight on terms favorable to the Confederates. Extensive field fortifications. Lee's defensive tactics at Spotsylvania were characterized by the extensive use of field fortifications, which had become a hallmark of Confederate strategy by 1864. These fortifications were designed to offset the Union's numerical superiority and provide cover for his troops. Earthworks and trenches. Confederate engineers and soldiers worked tirelessly to construct a network of earthworks, trenches, and abatis, obstacles made of felled trees. These fortifications provided excellent protection against Union artillery and small arms fire. The trenches were often dug in a zigzag pattern to minimize the impact of enfilading fire and to allow defenders to move safely along the lines. Log reinforcements. In addition to earthworks, Lee's men reinforced their positions with logs and timber, creating sturdy breastworks that could withstand heavy bombardment. These log reinforcements were particularly effective in the Mule Shoe salient, where they helped Confederate troops repel repeated Union assaults. Artillery emplacements. Lee positioned his artillery batteries at key points along the line, often on elevated ground with clear fields of fire. These batteries were protected by earthworks and were used to devastating effect against Union infantry during their attacks. The concentrated fire from Confederate artillery played a crucial role in breaking up Union assaults and inflicting heavy casualties. Tactical flexibility and rapid reinforcements. Lee's ability to adapt to changing circumstances and reinforce threatened sectors of his line was a key factor in his defensive success at Spotsylvania. Interior lines. The Confederate position at Spotsylvania allowed Lee to take advantage of interior lines, enabling him to move troops quickly from one sector of the battlefield to another. This flexibility was critical in responding to Union attacks, as Lee could reinforce threatened areas before the Union could exploit any breakthroughs. The role of reserves. Lee maintained a strong reserve force, which he used to plug gaps in his line and launch counterattacks. During the brutal fighting at the Mule Shoe salient on May 12, Lee personally directed reinforcements to the sector, stabilizing the line and preventing a Union breakthrough. Counterattacks. Lee understood that a purely defensive posture could not hold indefinitely against Grant's relentless pressure. He frequently ordered localized counterattacks to disrupt Union assaults and regain lost ground. These counterattacks were often launched by elite units such as General John B. Gordon's division, which played a key role in repelling Union forces at the Bloody Angle. Psychological warfare and morale. Lee's leadership and the morale of his troops were critical components of his defensive strategy. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Confederate soldiers fought with determination and resilience, inspired by their trust in Lee's command. Lee's presence on the battlefield was a significant morale booster for his troops. During the fighting at the Mule Shoe salient, Lee famously attempted to lead a countercharge himself, only to be restrained by his men, who shouted, "Lee to the rear." This incident underscored the deep loyalty and respect Lee commanded from his soldiers. Defensive mindset. Lee instilled a defensive mindset in his army, emphasizing the importance of holding their ground and protecting their homeland. This sense of purpose and determination enabled Confederate troops to endure the horrors of prolonged combat and repel repeated Union assaults, exploiting Union mistakes. Lee's defensive tactics were also aided by Union mistakes and missteps. Grant's aggressive approach often led to disjointed and poorly coordinated attacks, which Lee was quick to exploit. Overextension of Union forces. Grant's insistence on continuous offensive action sometimes resulted in overextension, with Union troops advancing into well-defended Confederate positions without adequate support. Lee capitalized on these situations by launching counterattacks and inflicting heavy casualties. Failure to exploit weaknesses. Despite several opportunities to exploit weaknesses in the Confederate line, Union commanders often hesitated or failed to coordinate their attacks effectively. Lee's ability to reinforce threatened sectors and maintain a cohesive defensive line prevented Grant from achieving a decisive breakthrough. The Battle of Spotsylvania Court House was a testament to Robert E. Lee's mastery of defensive warfare. Through a combination of terrain utilization, extensive fortifications, tactical flexibility, and inspired leadership, Lee was able to hold his ground against Grant's numerically superior forces. While the battle was ultimately a tactical stalemate, it demonstrated Lee's ability to adapt to the challenges of modern warfare and underscored the resilience of the Confederate Army. Lee's defensive tactics at Spotsylvania not only delayed Grant's advance on Richmond but also inflicted heavy casualties on the Union Army, prolonging the war and giving the Confederacy a glimmer of hope. However, the relentless pressure exerted by Grant's forces foreshadowed the eventual collapse of the Confederate war effort. Spotsylvania remains a defining moment in military history, showcasing the complexities and horrors of Civil War combat and the enduring legacy of Robert E. Lee as one of history's greatest defensive commanders.